My name is Jonathan Amoyaw, and I'm here today with Rachel, McLay, and Yoko Yoshida. And we are here to present findings from one of our recent reports on the retention of refugees in the province where they arrive. This is part of a data aggregation project for the Child and Youth Refugee Research Coalition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to first and foremost begin by giving an overview of the project. I'll talk briefly about the data set that we used and how we measured retention. And then Rachel will take over from me to share the specifics of the findings of the report. And then at the end, Yoko will give an overview and an introduction to the data source that we actually use and how you can actually access it. And also how it show how beneficial it is to gain such information with regards to retention and economic outcomes, which you can actually customize for your own use. Once again, this project was funded by the Child and Youth Refugee Research Coalition, and as has already been emphasized, it's a network of academics, government agencies, and community partners who have come together to mobilize knowledge to promote the well-being and integration of refugees, youth, and children and their families. And there are exciting research projects going on in this coalition. There are over 50 research projects ranging from issues pertaining to socioeconomic outcomes, language learning, integration and well-being. And I've also inserted a link here to the website, and I would like to encourage you to check out these exciting and insightful research projects that are going on in the coalition. First, I would like to start by saying that I believe many of us would agree that immigrants and their children contribute in diverse ways to the economy and the society as a whole in Canada. They contribute to diversifying the labor market and also contribute to supporting areas, especially where there is actually need for immigrants and resettlement of individuals. And as a matter of fact, their settlement and retention is an issue that has been a top priority in Canada, especially in small cities and in small provinces. And this has posed several issues and discussions pertaining to whether or not immigrants and refugees in particular tend to stay in the province where they arrive. For refugees in particular, when they arrive in their areas of settlement, they receive tremendous amount of support to be able to settle and develop economic independence so they can be able to build new lives for themselves and their families. And although they are not admitted based on economic reasons, they eventually end up contributing substantially to the economy of their place of residence. And these programs and initiatives that are actually put in place to support their settlement are all designed so that they can be able to settle in the place where they stay. And that makes it important for us to examine whether or not they remain in the province where they arrive, because it signals how well they are settling in their province of arrival, and also signals how well programs and initiatives that are intended to support their settlements are actually doing. And a few explanations can be gleaned from the literature to explain whether or not immigrants would, and refugees in particular, will stay in their province of arrival. And I would like to touch on a few of them. The first is the fact that unlike other category of immigrants like family class and economic class immigrants, many refugees' initial destinations is not self-chosen, but rather is determined by refugee settlement programs. And this has been highlighted as one of the reasons why refugees may be likely to leave their place of initial settlement. Another reason is the fact that refugees tend to settle in small cities, and to a large extent, these cities have limited economic and social connections. And there are several issues that have been raised in that regard in terms of a lack of employment prospects and issues pertaining to social isolation. And all of these have been highlighted in the literature. But there are also other reasons to expect and to explain why maybe refugees may be more likely to stay in the province where they arrive. And one of the key reasons is the fact that they receive tremendous support in their places of arrival. And for example, refugees receive income support. They have access to language and training programs. They also have targeted orientation programs for refugees. They have opportunities for them to resettle their children in schools, and also training programs to prepare them for the job market. And all of these things, once again, are intended to support them so they can stay in the province where they arrive. And the other point is that refugees also tend to resettle and relocate with large families. And that tends to give them some level of stability and rootedness in the province where they study. So against this backdrop, what we do in this project is to examine the trends or the retention rates of refugees in comparison to other immigrant categories, specifically economic immigrants and family class immigrants. But we also do these comparisons across cohorts as well. And we use data from the Longitudinal Immigration Database. Just a brief note about this database. It's a very rich and powerful data source. It has relevant information. The IMDB has relevant information on immigrants, settlement that you can use to measure their settlement outcomes and their economic integration as well. So there are actually 3 components of this data set. We have the landing records that has information on immigrants' landing characteristics. So information about the admission category, their intended destination at arrival, their language proficiency at arrival. So there's a wealth of information about immigrants at the time of landing. And the second component is their tax files. So the tax records, which are actually obtained from CRA. And this also has information on their income, has information on the province where they filed their tax. So it makes it very easy and appropriate to be able to map out their mobility patterns with the tax files as well. And the third component is the temporary resident file. And this file contains information on all the permits that temporary migrants acquired. So if you need information about refugee claimants, you can have that information from the temporary resident file. But for the purpose of this project, information from the landing records and the tax files were actually combined to be able to map out the retention rates of immigrants and refugees, in particular in their province of study, province of destination. For the focus of this project, we looked at recent immigrants who landed between 2007 to 2015, and we subdivided them into 3 landing cohorts. And we also focused on specific provinces, particularly British Columbia, Alberta, Nova Scotia, and Manitoba. But for the purpose of this presentation, we will focus on just BC, Alberta, and Nova Scotia. Just a quick note, the fact that here we are talking about immigrants who landed and filed tax at least once since their landing. So in these computations or in this discussion, immigrants who landed and never filed tax are not included in our computations. Before I hand over to Rachel, I just wanted to talk a little bit about how retention is actually measured. And retention rates simply refers to the percentage of immigrant tax filers who remained in their destined province at a particular point in time. So here is just an illustration of using the 2007 landing cohorts who were destined to BC. And these, once again, are all tax filers. So for these cohort, those who subsequently filed tax in BC in 2008 are considered to be retained 1 year after landing. And those who subsequently filed tax in 2012 in BC are also considered to be retained 5 years after landing. So for the report, we focused on 1 year retention, 3 year retention, and then 5 year retention of refugees and immigrants as well. So now I would like to hand over to Rachel as she tells a little bit more about the actual findings of the project.
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so we're going to start with looking at BC. So notice that retention is quite high and fairly similar across the 3 cohorts, with 1 year retention around 90% and 5 year retention at 83%. So we're seeing a decent amount of stability in these rates over time, Of the 4 provinces we looked at in our report, retention rates in BC were the second highest. So some degree of mobility is to be expected, but we can see that most refugees who arrive in BC settle there for at least 5 years. So next we'll look at Alberta, where retention rates are even higher than in BC, with 5-year retention around 90%, or sorry, over 90% for the 2010 to 2012 cohort. And one likely explanation for these rates is refugees' economic success in Alberta. Our research has found higher employment rates and higher incomes among new refugees in Alberta compared to those in other provinces, including BC. So next we'll look at refugees in comparison to immigrants from other admission categories who arrived in the same cohort, 2010 to 2012. So in BC, we find that refugee retention rates are very similar to those of economic class immigrants, while retention rates of family class immigrants are noticeably higher than the other categories. It makes sense that having family already settled in the province would make immigrants more inclined to stay where they land. Without necessarily having those ties, both economic class immigrants and refugees could be more influenced to leave or to stay by things like job opportunities, resources, or their experiences in the community. In Alberta, however, we see this gap separating family class immigrants from economic class immigrants and refugees is much smaller. Again, this is likely an effect of the strong economic outcomes among new immigrants and refugees in Alberta. While our research has found in both provinces, employment rates and employment incomes are lower for refugees than for economic immigrants, these graphs show that the two groups are similar in terms of their decision-making about leaving or staying in the provinces where they land. So these Western provinces overall show fairly similar trends. But just to give you a better sense of how these outcomes can vary in different provinces, we're also going to show you what retention looks like in Nova Scotia. So as you can see, in Nova Scotia, there are some more differences between the cohorts and lower retention rates overall. Lower retention has been a long-standing issue in Atlantic Canada due to its smaller economy and lack of major urban centers. But we do also see signs of increased retention over time. So only 66% of refugees who landed in Nova Scotia in the 2007 to 2009 cohort were still residing in the province after 5 years. This increased to 72% for the 2010 to 2012 cohort. So comparing refugees to the other admission categories, we find that retention is low in Nova Scotia across categories, at least compared to the Western provinces we looked at. But refugees are staying in the province at similar rates to family class immigrants. And while a much higher proportion of those in the economic class are leaving the province within 5 years. So this gap between refugees and economic class immigrants is different than what we saw in the Western provinces, where those two groups had similar retention rates and where these rates seem to be correlated with positive economic outcomes. So instead, it could be that the relatively high retention rates of recent refugees to Nova Scotia point to more of the economic challenges faced by refugees compared to the economic class immigrants who may have more resources to leave to look for better job opportunities in other locations if they chose to. These results show that differences in local and provincial conditions matter a great deal in people's decisions to leave or stay in the province that they land. And the relationships between these conditions and decisions are not always straightforward. So just to briefly sum up these findings, we can see that a large majority of refugees overall do stay in the province where they land for at least 5 years. But retention rates can vary a great deal by province. So while in Alberta and BC, more than 4 out of 5 refugees across all cohorts stay in their province of landing for at least 5 years, in Nova Scotia, this figure is as low as 66%, and it varies by cohort. And last, we also want to draw your attention to how these findings can point to potential areas of concern, which can be explored further using the IMDB data and the tools provided on the StatsCan website, which Dr. Yoshida will be showing you in just a moment. So for example, we were also able to look at refugees' economic outcomes by province, and we found that there is reason to be concerned about the socioeconomic conditions faced by recent cohorts of refugees to Nova Scotia. Studying diverse groups like refugees over time and across all of Canada is a complex process, but these tools are a great way to start identifying patterns and trends in the data, which can then be supplemented by other kinds of research into refugees' experiences and outcomes. And these can help to guide policy and ensure that more people's needs end up getting met. So I'll turn things over now to Dr. Yoko Yoshida to talk about how you can get access to the data.
Thanks, Rachel. Thanks, Jonathan, and thank you everyone for joining us. And thank you very much for inviting us to present this data. So now, briefly, I'd like to talk about the data, and IMDB is something that most of you might be familiar with at this point. And as Jonathan has talked about, IMDB is a very powerful data source because it includes virtually everyone who landed in Canada as a permanent resident and who filed the tax. So it's not like any other, the survey data that we only sample the immigrants, but rather it's a comprehensive coverage for the census of the immigrant tax filers. But now it's kind of hard to get an access to the raw data unless you have the affiliation with the university, or you can even have a contract to get into certain facilities to access to this raw data of the raw data version of IMDB. But then it requires quite a bit of training if you were to use these complex data sets. However, recently, Statistics Canada offers a very useful resources that allows us to look at the quick snapshot of mobility and economic outcomes of the newcomers. So today, I'm going to be focusing on the mobility series rather than economic series, but then I can also provide a link for economic outcome. So the link provided in the previous slide, is the link which, this is the link which gets you to this website. And I'm just gonna put this website link to the chat box so that if you're interested, you can explore as well. So I think it should be it. All right. So now when you click this link, next slide, this is a landing page. So this is the series for the interactive app for the Longitudinal Immigration Database for mobility series provided by Statistics Canada. So on the landing page, it shows first a number of the immigrant tax filers in Canada. Not yet, Jonathan. So the default is set at the landing year of 2011 cohort, and the default is set at 5 years since landing. So now, if we want to specify a more granular group of individuals to look at the retention and mobility information, now we can customize. So next page. So if we want to see, for example, what is the 2-year retention rates of the refugees who arrived in BC, who admitted in 2015 admission year. So 2015, this group, the refugee cohort in this year captures the onset of the refugee cohort who arrived towards the end of this year. And then right now we can look into the up to 2-year retention rate. Because the latest tax record that we can obtain from this interactive app is 2017. So in order to get the 2-year retention for 2015 landing cohort, we look at the tax year of 2017. So which provinces these refugees filed the tax. So to do so, first we might want to set the year of admission at the bottom, and select the year as 2015, and select the year since admission as 2. And then go up top, select the province of landing and as a British Columbia, and then we select the admission category as refugees. And then by doing so, the number on the left-hand side of the panel the retention number you can get for this specific group of individuals. So it's 89.8%. So it's pretty high retention rates. So this is pretty simple, but there are a few things that I wanted to draw your attention, which is about the years, how years is being calculated in StatScan, and most of the researchers who use this IMDB. So first, in StatScan's definition of retention, which also follow, we calculate this year since landing as a reference. So this does not, so the year since landing does not include the year of landing itself. So we do this in part because for some people who land in the later month of a specific year, like who landed in or to get an admission paper in November or December, sometimes they do not obviously spend the first entire year of that particular year in Canada, and also they often do not file the tax, so they do not appear on the IMDB. So to avoid the underestimation of those who landed in the later month of any given year, it is recommended to assess the retention or other economic outcomes, other outcomes based on the records of the year after they landed as the first year. Also, another caveat is that, as I said before, in the current website, this version of the IMDB interactive interface, the latest year, taxation year available is 2017. So last cohort that we can get, the 5-year retention is actually only 2012. But for the shorter retention span, like the 4 or 3-year retention, we can go up to the admission cohort of 2014. And for 2015, we can go up to 2-year retention because of that. But soon, I think that the StatScan will be changing this website, adding the tax record information from 2018. So we might be able to go back to the older cohort, slightly older cohort for the retention. So other than that, next slide. We can also specify the particular age groups. So in this website, we can get the 3 age categories. So first category is 15 to 24 years old, which captures the individuals who land as a youth, young people. And next category captures 25 to 54, which actually corresponds to prime working age. And an older immigrants, 50 and older, is the last category that we can look at. And within this specific age category, we can specify men and women. Another thing that we can customize in this website is the knowledge of official language at landing. So we can only look at the retention rates and the number of immigrants in specific area for based on their knowledge in official language, English, French, English and French, and English, neither of English and French category as well. And also on this website, we can look at the outcomes, in this case, the mobility series. We can look at the retention of specific immigrants to specific region in a specific year for those who had a pre-admission Canadian experience as compared to those who do not have pre-admission Canadian experience. So we can look at the individuals who held the study permit, work permit, or asylum claim before they became permanent residents. We can specifically look at the outcome of these groups. So by comparing the retention rates across various subgroups of newcomers or refugees over time, we can see if there's any specific groups who are more likely to leave or more likely to stay than other groups. And by looking at, by identifying the specific groups who has specifically high rates of retention or high rates of leaving, that actually signals that something is going on. So that actually lead us to explore the further investigation. And so generally, by looking at these trends, that actually offers a contextual evidence base for further investigation. But if we want to investigate further, what affects individuals to leave, or what actually, leads to the certain retention factor, we have to rely on other types of data. Next slide. So for that, we need to use more than the tabulation. So we have to look at the regression analysis, or we have to do a little bit more to identify the cause to explain those patterns. So for that, we have to use microdata. So the microdata is individual information coming from those specific the databases that Jonathan was talking about, the landing record, the tax file, and then temporary residence file. And then we have to link all this information at individual level. And then we have to do quite a bit of work to clean up so that we can analyze these patterns. And that can be accessed through the research data centers across Canada. And they are located inside on the major university campus. And as an academic researchers, for academic research, we have an access to IMDB. But then as researchers outside of academic institution, you need to request a contract with Statistics Canada. So you need to contact with StatsCan, and the service can be provided to non-academic researchers, but then it's going to be on the service will be provided on the cost recovery basis. So if you have a researcher that you can collaborate, that's one way to have an access is to start coming up with a collaboratory research project. And so if you go into the SERC website and beyond, there are researchers who are working in this area in academic fields. So that's something that you can reach out as well. And if you're curious about how you can get the IMDB, or what kind of customization, or what if you have any questions about the website that we talk about, you can also, we are happy to offer more info. So you can send an email to us. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. But if you are interested in economic outcomes, I will also send another link on the chat box, which shows the economic outcome series.